According to the U.S. military website, Global Firepower, China's military is ranked third in the world in terms of overall military power because of huge numbers in various categories. To be sure, the Chinese military maintains a large monetary figure. However, since the Chinese military is under the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, it is perhaps one of the most wasteful militaries in the world due to corruption within the party. Therefore, it is doubtful that China's real ability to fulfill its military strategy will ever reach the top 3 in the world. China's vast territory and large number of neighboring countries make defense difficult. The more sensible military strategy should be to ensure homeland defense first, then to develop effective counterattack capabilities and gradually seek a balance between offense and defense. China's 2019 Defense White Paper writes that with more than 22,000 kilometers of land borders and 18,000 kilometers of mainland coastline, China has the largest number of neighbors, the longest land borders, and one of the most complex maritime security environments in the world. It is clear that China's professional military departments were aware of the importance of defense. However, the Chinese military follows the orders of the Chinese Communist Party and puts political correctness first. I wonder which Communist Party leaders have developed and implemented the opposite strategy for the Chinese military, disregarding the long land borders and rushing to move from a land power to a maritime power. China's 2019 White Paper summarizes that since 2012, the increased national defense spending has been mainly used for A. Regular increases in the salary and income of military personnel. B. Increased investment in the construction of weapons and equipment, research and development, and procurement of new weapons and equipment, such as aircraft carriers, combat aircraft, missiles, and main battle tanks. The CCP's military strategies are framed as striving for world leadership, strengthening national maritime force, actively participates in international space cooperation and accelerates the development of corresponding technologies and capabilities, expediting the construction of cyberspace forces, and strictly managing the security of nuclear weapons and related facilities. Under the guidance of such almost insane military strategy, China's land force has failed to improve its long-term outdated equipment, and its air force has failed to establish superiority. The Navy grew the fastest, but it was unable to form sufficient maritime power to compete for command of the sea. In fact, the Chinese army now finds themselves in a dilemma of being difficult to conduct a defense or launch an attack. Let's take a look at the overview of China's military. China's population is nearly 1.4 billion, but is aging, with an active military of about 2.19 million, an actual military of 3.35 million, and a reserve of about 2 million. The command hierarchy of the CCP military is under the control of the CCP Supreme Leader, and the selection of officers is not based on professional competence, but more on nepotism. The change of leadership often leads to a major purge of the military command hierarchy, and the top priority of the CCP military is actually to ensure the core position of the CCP's supreme leaders. The CCP supreme leaders are most worried about a coup in the military and never easily delegate power because that is not conducive to wartime command and coordination. Mainland China's GDP in 2020 is claimed to be 15 trillion, ranking second in the world, but GDP per capita is just over 10,000, ranking 69th in the world. China officially announces that military spending is about 180 billion. However, the actual spending could possibly be up to 250 billion. The Chinese military's main weaponry is imitated from the former Soviet Union or Russia, and some of its weapons development has been self-imitated from military powers such as the US and Europe. Those weapons are of poor quality and largely unproven in actual combat. The Chinese military has few allies and hardly receives any substantial military assistance. Let's look first at the army. The Chinese army has the largest number of men, about 910,000, and in 2017, the original 18 group armies were reorganized into 13 group armies, not with focus on actual combat, but mainly because of the need to reorganize the officer system due to the change of leadership in the Chinese political sphere. China has recently made frequent threats of force against Taiwan, the Republic of China, ROC, the regime that preceded the Communist Party's occupation of the Chinese mainland. The sea area within the first island chain is the most effective area for the U.S. military to defend the People's Liberation Army, and the Taiwan Strait is a key to the first island chain. Therefore, the Taiwan Strait is the focus area of war for many countries. However, the three army groups in China's Eastern Theater have less than 200,000 men, plus about 50,000 Marines, for a total of about 250,000 men. Taiwan has about 200,000 defenders. From the experience of prior landing operations, the ideal ratio of the number of attackers to the number of defenders should be 7-1, and at least it should not be less than 3-1. Otherwise, it will be difficult to achieve victory. To attack Taiwan, the CCP would need to transfer one group of troops from each of the other theaters to the Eastern Theater to barely make up the 3-1 minimum, but the other theater defenses would become very weak. Because China's northern Russia, the Korean Peninsula, the southwestern China-India borders, and the China-Vietnam border are all equally at risk of war, once Taiwan is under attack, these border zones will become very vulnerable in terms of defense. In addition, although the Chinese army has a large number of soldiers, the army's equipment level is uneven and its quantity is insufficient to equip all the troops, so it can hardly be called a modern army. For example, the CCP only has 3,205 tanks, most of which are Type 96 tanks, and a few are Type 99 tanks, which in reality are derived from the model of the Russian T-72 tanks, and also partially imitate the American and European tanks. The last time the Chinese Communist Party's tanks went to war was during the Sino-Vietnam War. The Chinese Communist Party has about 9,000 various types of infantry armored vehicles, both old and new, which have not experienced actual combat. Moreover, the media has recently uncovered a major corruption and bribery scandal. Apparently, the steel armor for light battle vehicles was substituted with substandard steel. In terms of air power, the Communist Air Force has 398,000 personnel in service and 3,250 military aircraft as published on the Global Firepower website. However, there are only 3 air refueling aircraft, which severely limits the scope of the Communist Air Force operations. Among China's main fighters, there are 22 units of the J-20, which claims to be the 5th-generation fighter aircraft. However, their engines, stealth ability, and onboard equipment have not really passed the test. The CCP has about 530 units of 4th-generation fighters, which are mainly imported from Russia or imitated Russian fighters. They are modified with homemade radar, avionics, and engines. Therefore, compared to Russia's jets, they lose in mobility, but have advantage in avionics technology. However, when evaluating their overall performance, they are not as advanced as expected. China still has 468 units of its own produced 3rd-generation fighter J-10, while earlier generation fighters have already been retired. China's early warning aircraft, reconnaissance aircraft, and electric airplanes also imitate Russia before copying the U.S. military, and their actual performance is difficult to be determined. The Chinese air-to-air Thunderbolt series of missiles, the air-to-ground Rapier series of missiles, and the Hawk series of anti-ship missiles were also copied from Russia and then from the US. All of them have not been tested in actual combat. The Chinese Air Force has some experience in air combat, including the Korean War and several encounters with the Taiwanese Air Force in the 1950s and 1960s. If the Chinese Communist Party wants to use force in the Taiwan Strait, there is no guarantee that it would be able to defeat the Taiwanese Air Force in an air battle. Moreover, it would be difficult for them to deal with Taiwan's anti-aircraft missiles. It seems that truly seizing air control is not as simple as what the CCP claimed. Although there are bombers and attack aircraft deployed in the Eastern Theater, if they cannot gain air control, it will be difficult for them to execute effective attacks, and support for amphibious landings will be limited. If U.S. forces join the battle, China may quickly lose in the air war. The Chinese Communist Air Force is also assigned to an air defense missile brigade, which is primarily responsible for medium and long-range air defense. The Chinese Communist Party's air defense capabilities are still limited, and there is currently no mature terminal phase interceptor system. China's coastal military ports, airfields, and missile bases would have difficulty withstanding U.S. long-range air-to-surface missiles and shipborne cruise missiles. The Chinese Air Force also has about 40,000 airborne troops, but with limited and slow transport aircraft, they will not be able to deal with anti-aircraft missiles. Therefore, they are difficult to be effective in combat, whether against Taiwan or in other battlefields. In recent years, the Chinese Communist Party has invested the most in the Navy with the intention of realizing the CCP's ocean-going military strategy, and the number of equipment has been rapidly increasing. China's Navy has about 300,000 personnel in service. According to the Global Firepower website, China has 2 aircraft carriers, 50 destroyers, 46 frigates, 72 patrol ships, 79 submarines, and 123 patrol boats. Of the 2 aircraft carriers, the Liaoning is the second of the Kuznetsov-class carriers of the former Soviet Union, while the Shandong is the same class carrier, a replica of the Liaoning. Both aircraft carriers have a ski jump deck but no takeoff catapult, relying on the thrust of the aircraft to lift off. China has developed the J-15 based on the former Soviet Su-33, but there are only 20 of them, which are not suitable to be carrier aircrafts because they are too heavy to take off with full fuel and load. Recently, Russia has been gradually replacing the former aircraft Su-33 with MiG-29s. However, it is difficult for the Chinese carriers to develop a real combat capability without suitable aircraft. Aircraft carriers are supposed to be the core of the CCP's move toward a blue water navy, but neither the carriers already built or under construction are nuclear powered. They lack carrier aircrafts and cannot be deployed for long periods of time, so it seems that the CCP's carriers are used more for image display. The Chinese Navy does not yet have a theoretical model for ocean-going operations, much less a true mastery of training subjects. China has many destroyers and other small warships, but their performance is unproven. They lack effective defense capabilities, and the quality and performance of key radars are not as good as expected. The latest U.S. Army report points out that CCP military and political leaders do not have a clear understanding of the ultimate size and composition of the Navy in practice. The CCP Navy has limitations or weaknesses in certain areas, including joint warfare coordination capabilities, anti-submarine capabilities, long-range replenishment capabilities at sea, the need to train large numbers of personnel to adapt to new ships, and lack of recent combat experience. This report also clarifies that the Navy's operational capabilities are increasingly derived from the complexity of shipborne electronics and software, the difference in capabilities of specific types of warships, and other factors, including sensors, weapons, command automation systems, cyber capabilities, stealth characteristics, damage control characteristics, cruising range, maximum speed, and reliability and maintainability. The Chinese Navy may lack effective operational doctrine and tactics, as well as the authenticity and complexity of training. Its ability to influence and win battles is therefore limited. I'm afraid that the Chinese Navy is barely in the top 10 in the world in terms of actual combat capability. With such power, it will take quite a long time for China to become a maritime power. In the next episode, we will talk about China's proudest rocket army and what it's really like. Stay tuned to our channel.